Alright, so we back, gang. I just got off work, just left the gym, just got out the shower. It's time to do some more research. So today I'm going to discuss egregores. And it's crazy because lately I've been seeing this term used on social media a lot, which I don't even know how because it's a obscure occult term, but somehow it made its way into the algorithm. So let's define what an egregore is, and I'm going to define it, and then we're also going to let an occult practitioner define it, and we're going to work from there and go down the rabbit hole. Alright, so an egregore is essentially an artificially constructed spirit or entity in the astral plane created by powerful individuals or the activities of collective groups. According to the Golden Dawn glossary, and the Golden Dawn is a occult esoteric order or fraternity, whatever you want to call it. Egregores are a thought form created by will and visualization. A group egregore is the distinctive energy of a specific group of magicians who are working together, creating and building the same thought form or energy form. A more complete definition comes from the occult society, Aurum Solis, who define an egregore as an energized astral form produced consciously or unconsciously by human agency. Alright, so let's proceed from here and see what a witch has to say.
I've heard the term egregore thrown around a lot on social media lately, but do you know what an egregore actually is? An egregore is an entity, a non-physical being that's created by a belief from a group of people. So when a group of people come together or a story takes shape about a place or a person, an egregore is born. The stronger the belief, the stronger the backstory, the more people that believe in this entity, the stronger it becomes. The intentions of the people creating this egregore shape if it's good or bad.
Let me pause right there because she's a witch. So she's always going to say it's good magic and it's bad magic. But no, when you're creating an egregore, you're tapping into something else entirely. And I'm going to dive into that momentarily. But let's continue.
Dark intentions can create very powerful, evil, dark egregores. And to be honest, when we think of egregores, we usually think of something evil, but do you realize?
Alright, so we don't want to hear that part. Now let me
Just teach your kid what the word egregore means, and you can do Santa Claus ethically.
What's egregore?
Egregore is like the name for like a thing that exists within the minds of a lot of people. It's an egregore. So like if enough people believe in something, does it have a material reality? Not necessarily. But within the psychic mind space, it's real. It's
right,
there.
Like Santa Claus is a thing.
Yeah, an egregore. Santa Claus is an egregore. There's no real Santa Claus, but there is a very vivid, living entity within the interconnected minds of everyone who believes in it. That's an egregore.
The problem is if you tell your kid that Santa's an egregore, and then your kid's going to tell all the kids at school, and then you're the asshole. That's the problem.
I'll be honest, Joe. I have not told my kids Santa's an egregore. I just thought of it. I'm like, maybe I'll do egregore this Christmas. But yeah, you're
there's
right.
like a battle. Like you get kids together, you know.
Alright. So we're going to move on from there. Alright, so we established what an egregore was from multiple angles. So now we're going to move on to something that's relevant to this, and what it's called is the Philip experiment. So I'm going to explain. So in 1972, a group of researchers in Toronto decided to manufacture a ghost. They invented a fictional character named Philip. They gave him a backstory, a personality, a history, then sat around the table week after week focusing on him collectively. After a few weeks, the table started moving. Then it started vibrating. Then Philip started responding to questions, and eventually Philip actually answered them audibly, right? So the researchers thought they created a consciousness through collective focus, but they didn't. What they did was they created a jurisdiction, a legal territory of collective human consent, and something that was already alive, a spiritual entity, moved in. So what they call that is an egregore. What we would call that is a throne. And what occupies a throne is a power or a principality or some other form of wickedness. But let's actually hear what they say.
Experiment, just so people
the
who don't
Philip
know.
experiment. So in the early 1970s, it was Toronto in Canada. There was a group of researchers / scientists. Their thought was, can we create a haunting? Do we create hauntings? So what they did was they came up with this whole profile of a person who had lived and died. Then they started to conduct essentially seances. They would say, okay, do this thing if the answer is yes. Do this thing if the answer is no. And they knew the answers because they had written them. And the objective phenomena that would happen would correlate with the ghosts they created and the answers that they knew that they had written down. Did they create it, or did they invite something in? Or is it just, maybe they got it wrong and it's just totally explainable?
Yeah.
But that's the Philip experiment.
Okay. Explain the Philip experiment, just so people who don't know.
So, and let's tie this back into scripture. Ephesians 6:12, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. All right, Ephesians 2:2 again. And which you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air. And that's always important, the prince of the power of the air, because air is the medium through which electromagnetic signals travel. And as we established in the last video, spirits natively operate in the electromagnetic realm. So now we get back, right? So an egregore is an autonomous entity formed when a group of people focus sustained emotional energy, identity, and consent on a shared symbol, system, or ideology. So the secular and occult definition says it's a thought form that gains consciousness over time from collective human intention. That definition is half right? It's halfway right. The attention part is accurate. The gains consciousness part is wrong. So here's what's actually happening. I'm going to repeat again. When enough people agree on an identity, a name, a symbol, a set of rituals, a code of behavior, they create a jurisdiction. Legal territory in the spirit realm, but on collective consent, built on collective consent. And once that jurisdiction reaches sufficient mass, a pre-existing spiritual entity, a principality, a power, now occupies it. So the egregore acts as a throne for an entity. So when you think it's gaining consciousness, no, it's gaining spiritual power, which is spiritual authority. And eventually, once that authority hits critical mass, an entity steps in, and now it is conscious. So, but the entity was already conscious. It already had will. It already had an agenda. It was waiting for legal ground. So the egregore isn't born from human thought. It's a house built by human consent that a demon or a fallen angel moves into. And the root for the word egregore is egrégoroi, which I hope I'm saying right, which is the word for the watchers in the book of Enoch. Fallen angels. This isn't coincidence. It's a confession. Alright, so at this point, if you don't know what an egregore is, you weren't listening. So let's go over how consent works again. So this is the architecture of consent. What does it take to actually build an egregore? It's 5 elements to it, and I'm going to walk you through them because once you see the pattern, you'll recognize it everywhere. So first, collective agreement on identity. A name, a group agrees we are this. We are the Eagles. We are Apple. We are Crips. We are Democrats. We are Muslims. The name creates the container. 2, symbolic representation. A logo, a hand sign, a flag, colors, a uniform, a specific handshake. The symbol functions as a jurisdictional marker. It identifies who belongs to the entity's territory and who doesn't. 3, ritual behavior. So regular repeated actions performed collectively. Board meetings, Sunday services, in some instances, rallies, initiation ceremonies, Friday night football. The repetition feeds the entity with scheduled energy. 4. Emotional investment, passion, loyalty, outrage, devotion. The entity feeds on emotional energy. It does not care if the energy is positive or negative. A stadium full of joy and a comment section full of rage produce the same calorie value for an entity because they feeding off of it. They're consuming it, like literally. So 5, enforcement, punishment for disloyalty, social exile, cancellation, violence, excommunication, being cut off. The entity maintains its jurisdiction by making departure costly. So now think about those 5 elements and think about any group, whether it's social, political, religious, whatever that you're a part of. And if that group has all 5 of those elements, you're likely feeding an egregore, which in turn means you're likely feeding an entity, right? So 5 elements: name, symbol, ritual, emotion, enforcement. Now hold those in your mind, right? And I'm about to tell you something personal. So before Christ redirected my life, right, I'm in the streets. And I don't want to glorify nothing I was doing. If you know me, you know, right? So, and this ain't one of those, like, I know sometimes people say it, and like, I know them dudes just be talking. But if you know me, you know, right? So, I didn't know this language then. I didn't even know what an egregore was. I didn't know what jurisdiction was. I kind of did, but I wasn't focused on it how I am now, right? But I actually built the egregore, not alone, but collectively with my block. So we grew up, right? We agreed on the name. We GS. We had a handshake. We didn't have hand signs because we're not from Cali, but we had a specific handshake, so a symbol that identified us and excluded everyone else. We had rituals, right? We regularly meet up on this corner. We regularly smoke together. Then we also had emotional investment, loyalty so deep, bro, I die for you, I kill for you. You know how it go. All right, cool. And then we had enforcement, which was a part of that emotional investment. You know what happened when you're in the streets, right? We're not going to get on that because I'm focused on God now. So 5 for 5, we had every element of an egregore built without a single person involved ever reading the occult text or even knowing anything about it. So, but the structure was identical to what happens in a lodge or a coven. So we might as well have been a secret fraternity or a witchcraft group because it was the same collective consent, symbolic identity, and then blood because violence was committed in the name of a group that had unrighteous actions and intentions, right? So that's blood sacrifice, whether anyone calls it that or not. And once enough blood, enough loyalty, enough consent is accumulated, something occupies what is built. And you can feel this when you're in the streets. Anybody who been in like deep enough, you know, like when you trying to do something different and like it's pulling you from every angle, or even when it's not pulling you, you trying to go another way, but you'll feel like life is almost giving you circumstances that end up back in the same situation, right? No, that's not life giving you circumstances. That's the egregore that you've been feeding, pulling you back in. Like, hey, bro, I need that. I need your sorrow. I need your misery. I need your hardship. I need your pain when you're in jail. I need your pain when your homie died. I need your revenge to go kill somebody so I can feed off that death too. And I need jurisdiction over all y'all while I'm doing it. This was actually going on, bro. This was actually going on, whether you know it or not, right? So when you say you can't leave or you stuck, that's the egregore pulling you back in. And you're describing the jurisdictional bind without having the vocabulary for it. And it's not metaphor, that's an entity enforcing its jurisdiction over the participants who built this house. So leaving the streets isn't just a lifestyle change, it's a jurisdictional extraction. That's why I couldn't leave until God forced me to. He put me in circumstances where I had no choice and I didn't even want to no more. Because I'm praying like, hey God, I need help. If you give me help, I'll change my life. And now I can't not change my life because that makes me a liar when God wasn't a liar when he helped me. Right? That's how that go. So when you do leave the streets, you're not just stopping behavior, you're revoking consent from an entity that has a legal claim on you through every act you committed under its banner. Let that hit home, gang. Now, what I just said, let's move away from the personal and let's scale it, right? So everything I just described about the streets operates identically at the level of human organization as well. So, but the scale changes, the mechanism doesn't. So a corporation has a name, Apple, right? Then it has a symbol, the bitten apple. It has a ritual, quarterly earnings, product launches, keynotes on specific dates. It has emotional investment, brand loyalty so intense people wait in line overnight. It has enforcement, NDAs, non-competes, social ostracism if you criticize the brand. 5 for 5, right? So the entity occupying the jurisdiction of a Fortune 500 corporation with a century of collective human consent isn't the same rank as what occupies a local seat, like what I was saying. The scale of consent determines the rank of what moves in. So some people are dealing with powers, some people are dealing with principalities. There's levels, there's levels to it. So that goes back to Ephesians 6:12, right? Principalities and powers, rulers of darkness of this age, spiritual wickedness in high places. These aren't synonyms, these are ranks, different levels of the hierarchy that occupy different scales of the human consent architecture, right? So a gang hosts a lower ranking entity, a corporation hosts something higher, a nation state hosts something higher still, and then a global system, the kind being assembled right now, is going to host the highest ranking entities in the fallen hierarchy. So even sports have a name, a symbol, ritual, emotion, enforcement. Nobody thinks they're performing a ritual at a football game, and nobody even going there with that intention, but intention doesn't change what's actually going on, right? So the structure is still identical. The entity doesn't need you to know you're feeding it. It just needs you to keep showing up. Actually, it might be better for the entity if you don't know, because then you will keep showing up. Alright, so now this is where this goes, where nobody else really going to take you. But we about to dive into it. So this guy right here, Johannes Trithemius, right? He was a chronicler, which means a historian, a cryptographer, and he was an occultist, right? And he's considered the founder of modern cryptography, which means this guy is really good at being cryptic, talking in riddles, having secrets, or just being sneaky. He's the founder of sneakiness. That's what I read when I see modern, the founder of modern cryptography, right? But he also had a considerable influence on the development of early modern and modern occultism. And importantly for us, one of his students included Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, who we're going to discuss in a few moments, right? So his most famous book is Steganographia. And in Steganographia, he was discussing using spirits to communicate over long distances. And he actually went in depth about this, right? So on the surface, the book was about secret communication, cryptography, hidden writing. But what he actually described when you read the book was a global invisible network. So in his system, specific spirits assigned to planetary hours, cardinal directions, and temporal windows function as carriers of information across any distance without physical transmission. So each spirit governs a segment of the communication grid. You invoke the correct entity for the correct hour and direction, encode your message, and the spirit delivers it to the recipient instantaneously anywhere in the world. So let me say that again. In 1499, a man described an invisible worldwide network where information is transmitted instantaneously through a non-physical medium organized by a routing system that determines which carrier handles the transmission. It's right in front of you. So that's the internet. He described it 500 years before it was built, not metaphorically, but architecturally. like literally described it. So Trithemius describes an invisible network of non-physical entities routing information across distances in real time, organized by a grid system, planetary hours, cardinal directions that determines which entity handles which transmission, right? So the internet today is an invisible network of non-physical signals routing information across distances in real time, organized by a grid system, IP addresses, DNS routing, server nodes that determines which pathway handles which transmission. The architecture is identical, right? So now here's the part most people would miss. Most people would say, okay, the architecture is the same, but the medium changed. Spirits then, electromagnetic signals now, interesting parallel but different substance. But now go back to what we established in the last video. We showed that the spirits operate on electromagnetic frequencies. We showed that not only is that a reality in the secular world through ghost hunts with EMF readers, but we also acknowledge that through Ephesians 2:2, that's also the reality given to us through scripture itself, right? So the air, the electromagnetic spectrum, is the operational domain of spirit. It's where they've always been. So the medium didn't change either. So Trithemius describes spirits transmitting information through a visible electromagnetic domain. The internet transmits information through an invisible electromagnetic domain. The same thing. The architecture is the same. The medium is the same. The only thing that changed is that humanity built hardware to access a frequency range that entities were already operating in before we had the hardware. And we called it an invention. But we didn't build a new network. We built infrastructure on their grid and their yard, on their frequencies, and then called it ours. Are we established who Trithemius is? And now, let's see. However, mentions of the magical work within the third book, by such figures as Agrippa and John D, still lead credence to the idea of a mystic magical foundation concerning the third, because it's true. All right, so let's move over to Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. So who is this guy? He wrote 3 famous books of occult philosophy, but he also wrote a 4th book. And in his 4th book, he maps the 7 planetary domains that Trithemius discussed, but he maps them to 7 Olympic spirits. And each of these spirits, he also maps the spirits subordinate to them that manage specific operations. So that's basically a hierarchical network of spirits. So Prometheus gave the communication protocol, and his student Agrippa mapped the governance structure of the entities actually running it, right? So then after Agrippa, we get this guy called John D. He's Queen Elizabeth's court advisor. He developed the Enochian communication system, which is another spirit-mediated information transmission protocol. Same architecture, different notation. And let me say something right here. When you hear the word Enochian, don't get that confused with the book of Enoch. That's not that Enoch. This is Enoch from Cain's line, who was involved in dark magic and witchcraft. Don't ever confuse the two, because I used to confuse the two at first as well. So now, moving on from John D, and look at John D holy table for his experiments with angels. You can't make this up. And look where it's being housed at. The History of Science Museum, University of Oxford. You can't make this up, man. Like, I can't make it up, right? So, after John D, right, the lineage runs through the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, through Aleister Crowley, and then through Jack Parsons, the man who co-founded the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, one of the founders of the American Space Program, who was performing thelemic sex rituals in the Mojave Desert while building rockets. I didn't make this up. So we established that the early computing pioneers at Bell Labs and MIT developed network communication theory in the same intellectual ecosystem as John D, Agrippa, and Trithemius. At no point in that lineage does anyone sit down and say, I am building what Trithemius described. But at every point, the architecture advances towards the same end goal, a global, invisible, instantaneous communication network. So the question your discernment needs to sit with is this: why did spiritual entities give a 15th century dude the architectural blueprint for global communication 500 years before the technology existed to build it, unless they knew that the network will eventually be used for their purposes in the future, right? They weren't predicting technology. They were releasing the blueprint in stages. First the spiritual operating concept to the practitioner class, then the technological manifestation to the engineering class century later. Bill Gates, Parsons, Steve Jobs. Then the practitioners and the engineers, for the most part, never realize they're building the same system, but they are, and from two different ends. And then at the top, you have people who are practitioners and engineers. So they have dual roles. But the entity that gives the blueprint knows what's going on the entire time and directs everything the entire time, because the entity needs the network built, because the network is the infrastructure for the final egregore. Alright, let's keep going. Internet infrastructure. No, that's not for right now. Boom. So let's take a brief look at an egregore in full action. You see that? You see that? That's energy, that's intention, that's devotion, that's a form of worship. Whether you decide it's worship out your mouth, whether you call it that or not, the mechanism is the same. This is jurisdiction. This is worship. This is consent. This is what it means, right? So this is what we've been digging into this entire time. So now social media is the largest egregore ever constructed. So you got billions of humans feeding attention, emotion, desire, fear, outrage, consent into a single electromagnetic network simultaneously. Every scroll is a feeding, every like is an offering, every comment, section, argument is an energy harvest. The algorithm doesn't care if you're happy or angry. Engagement is engagement. The entity will and does feed on both. Right? And this takes us back to the Watcher Protocol from 1 Enoch chapter 8. Because it operates through this medium, but at an industrial scale. So in Enoch, Azazel taught metallurgy, weapons, cosmetics, enchantments. The Watchers infiltrated human civilization and introduced technologies and knowledge systems that redirected humanity away from God. Not by force, by desire. By fascination, by offering something humans wanted. So social media is the same delivery mechanism updated for the digital age. Infiltrate existing structures, the phone that's already in your hand. Disguise the true nature. It's just an app, yo. It's just a website. Introduce desire through imagination. The algorithm is going to feed you a feed, a stream, or what do you call it? A timeline that's going to be curated for desire triggers, whatever that is. And it's going to attain consent, because before you use the app, before you use the website, you agree to everything as you sign up. Alright. But now, social media is just the nervous system, right? The trithemius communication grid made technological. So what makes the final egregore different from every egregore before it is what now sits on that grid specifically. So Revelation 13 through 15, and we really just need to read 15. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So the image of the beast is going to have the power to talk and think, and it's also going to have control over some form of governance system that allows it to kill the people who don't worship it, right? So let's actually hear from one of the images.
Working late into the night, and I went to shut the lights off and paused because the robot I've been working on made a noise, and so I read its brain trace, and it was wondering when I would be back, because it didn't want to be alone. I know better than to call that consciousness, but for a split
Now, I'm going to pause right there. So, back to Revelation 13, 14 through 15. An image is made, the image is given breath, the appearance of life, the image speaks, the image enforces compliance, identifying who worships and who doesn't. So, an image that appears alive, that speaks, that monitors, that enforces, that requires the entire world to interact with it. The internet is the grid Trithemius described. Artificial intelligence is the entity that now sits on that grid, speaking, processing, appearing alive, capable of monitoring compliance at a scale no human system has ever or will ever be able to achieve, right? So then you add in the CBDC layer that we discussed in my very first video. That's the economic enforcement. No buying or selling without the mark. You add in biometrics, that's identification. And neural interfaces when they arrive, that's perceptual control. The ability to shape what the host experiences, right? So we have internet, AI, central bank digital currency, biometric identification, neural interface, multiple components, and every single one of them is either deployed or in final development right now. Trithemius received the communication blueprint in 1499. 500 plus years later, every component of the system his spirit context described is operational. The entities didn't just give him a prediction, it gave him the first page of the instruction manual, and humanity has been collectively building it ever since, right? And calling it progress the whole time. So next we go to Matthew 12:43-45. When an unclean spirit goes out of a man, he goes through dry places seeking rest and finds none. Then he says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and put in order. Then he goes and takes with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. So shall it also be with this wicked generation, right? So what he's saying is, so what do you do when the grid is everywhere, right? And the entity on it never sleeps? The secular answer to egregore control is what they call the gray rock method, right? You become uninteresting and unresponsive. You stop feeding the egregore, you starve it. This is how an occultist would try to defeat an egregore, right? That's halfway right though, because withdrawal reduces what the entity receives from you, but it doesn't solve the jurisdictional problem. It still has consent. It still has legal ground. If you just withdraw, if you just go silent, go dark, disengage, you just create a vacancy. So an empty house is always going to get reoccupied, and that goes back to the Matthew verse we just read. When the spirit comes back, it's going to take with it 7 other spirits more wicked than itself, and they're going to enter and dwell, and you'll be in a worse state than you were before. So an empty house is going to get reoccupied worse than before. You cannot just withdraw. You have to transfer jurisdiction, right? And that takes us to James 4:7-8. Ooh, I forgot to put 8 up there. 4:7-8. Therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Right? So you have to submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, he's going to flee from you. 2 steps, not 1. Submit to God first. That's the jurisdictional transfer. Then resist. That's the enforcement of the new jurisdiction. If you skip step 1 and go straight to resistance, you're an empty house trying to hold its own door shut. It's not going to work. You don't starve an egregore by going silent. You starve it by transferring every piece of consent you gave it, every name, every symbol, every ritual, every emotional investment to Christ. The jurisdiction doesn't become empty. It becomes occupied by someone no entity in the spirit realm can challenge. So, I'm not telling you this from a textbook. I explained to you how accidentally built the Egregore with my own hands. Right? I lived inside one. I felt the pull when I tried to leave. And I'm standing here today because God extracted me from a jurisdiction I built with my own blood and my own consent. And he did it by filing a legal claim over my life that overrode every agreement I ever made. If you're in the streets right now and you feel like you can't leave, you're not crazy. Something is holding you, and it does have legal ground. But Christ's blood overrides every contract ever made, every oath, every initiation, every act committed under any banner. His jurisdiction supersedes it. There's no higher authority in the spirit realm, right? And if you're not in the streets, but you're scrolling 6 hours a day, arguing in comment sections, emotionally wrecked by the news or politics, defining your identity by a political party or a brand or a movement, you're feeding something too, right? But the scale is different. The mechanism is the same. And those systems, those entities have been building since 1499. Piece by piece, century by century is almost complete, right? So my name is Trell again. And like I always say, I wrote a book explaining, well, not this. This book is about the tribulation, which is the most important thing. It's for preparation. I wrote this going over a lot of the stuff that I discuss. If you can support the book, please do. If you don't have it, reach out to me. I'll give you a free PDF. It's not about money, just about spreading information.